Today, I'm pleased to be here with Miss Nita Maggio. She's going to be talking to us about the St. Joseph's altar. The format of this is really informal, so if there's any questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask. We plan to talk about the altar and the tradition up here for a little while, and then walk outside and actually see the altar and talk about the different pieces and the significance of each. So thank y'all for being here. Miss Nita, we appreciate y'all.
Well, thank you.
Got a beautiful altar out there, and we know y'all been working hard, and you've had a lot of people helping y'all. So if we could start off by maybe you just talking about how you came about participating in this tradition.
Well, the St. Joseph's altar was new to me whenever I married into the Maggio family, but for years they had one in their home. And then they had them in churches, and Natchitoches has not really had big St. Joseph altars. Mostly it's been up at Powhatan.
Okay.
And for several years, for the last 7 or 8 years, the Knights of Columbus put one on over at St. Mary's at the Knights of Columbus Hall.
Okay.
And it takes everybody working together. One family or one group can't do it.
I can't hear you.
The microphones are not, they're only for the camera.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So you just have to speak loud. Okay. Sorry, y'all. So sorry, Miss Nita, you were saying about more of a prevalence in the Powhatan area.
Right, because they have a large concentration of the Italian people, and so they've always gathered together and
Okay.
did a real nice altar. And we are all familiar with the phrase, it takes a village. It takes a village to put one on, because everybody has to work together. And it's done on March 19th, and that's St. Joseph's feast day.
Okay.
That's, how I got
Yes, ma'am.
involved into it, was just through my husband's family.
Well, tell us about the altar at your home.
Well, we've not had one at our home, but when my husband was growing up,
Sorry.
they did. They had it. And most Italian families would have one in their home. And it was on a small scale.
Okay.
And then whenever they'd have them at churches, they'd have large ones.
What was the purpose? Why did they have Saint Joseph in particular honored in the Italian homes?
Well, usually it was for a favor that was asked and they received. Whether it was a sick child, or maybe son went off to the war, or for safe return, and then they would put up the St. Joseph's altar in Thanksgiving.
Yes.
For the favors asked, and that was through the years. And I'm sure in your family and all, you've had favors that you've prayed for and asked for, and it was their way of returning that and sharing with people who were less fortunate. And I think a lot of that I can bring out in whenever I read the little history about it. Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
Well, we'd love to hear the history if you'd like to read that.
Okay. A St. Joseph altar is an offering of love, labor, and sacrifice in honor of the patron saint of the Sicilians and the Universal Church. According to legend, the St. Joseph's altar originated in Sicily many centuries ago during a period of drought and famine. In desperation, the people turned to St. Joseph, asking his help and intercession. When the rains came and the crops prospered, their prayers were answered. In thanksgiving, the community made offerings to St. Joseph's of their most prized possession, food. Food. In his honor, they erected a lovely altar with 3 levels that represented the Holy Trinity. They draped it simply and beautifully in white, adorned it with flowers. Then they selected their finest grain, fruits, vegetables, seafood, and wine, and invited all the poor to share in their prayers and festivities. The custom and devotion continues today. Each year, altars laden with food are prepared on March 19th to celebrate St. Joseph's feast day. Reasons for having the altar vary: to fulfill a promise, to give thanks for a favor granted, such as the safe return of a loved one from a war, for healing of the sick, for a happy family, for success in studies and businesses. It is also an opportunity for the prosperous to share with those that are less fortunate. Preparations are made weeks in advance for the great day. Much hard work is involved, but precipitation, families, and friends joyously accept this as a form of sacrifice and a labor of love. Many hours are spent shaping and designing the elaborate loaves of bread and cookies decorated the altar. Quite a number of these items are symbolic. And I don't pronounce the Italian words well, so the cusciati, large golden brown bread with a glossy finish of egg white and sesame seed, is rolled and cut into wreaths representing the crown of thorns, hearts symbolizing the Sacred Heart of Jesus and Mary, the cross representing the crucifixion, the chalice for water and wine, a monstrance containing the host, St. Joseph's staff and beard, palms representing those strewn in Jesus' path in Jerusalem, Papakova, baskets containing dyed eggs foretell the coming of Easter. There are birds, fish, flowers, and whatever the artistic temperament dictates. The cookies are everybody's favorite. Fig cakes in many lovely patterns, large and small, biscotti, various shapes and sizes, iced in color of pink, green, white, yellow, and chocolate, flavored with almond, vanilla, lemon, anise, and other spices. The pigliottati, and that's not right, or GGs, are pastry kernels molded with caramelized sugar with pyramids that represent the pine cones Jesus played with as a child. They are fluffy coconut bars and lambs, Bible-shaped layer cakes, cannoli, and Italian-style beignets. In addition to all of the wheat products, there is a great display of fruits, vegetables, and variety of seafood. No meat is ever served on a St. Joseph's altar. Perhaps because the feast day occurs during the Lenten season, or because there was always a scarcity of meat. The few goats were retained for their milk and cheese. The altars from the weight of baked redfish, 12 fried whole trout, which are representative of Christ feeding the multitudes. Others claim this represents the 12 apostles. Shrimp, crab meat, and tuna are used in stuffed vegetables such as green peppers, eggplants, squash. Codfish, lobster, crawfish, and oysters are also enhance the table. Pasta Milanese is a leading entree on the altar. The tomato sauce is made with a fish base, anchovy, or fresh sardine, wild anise greens, pignoli, currants topped with fried seasoned breadcrumbs, modica instead of cheese. The breadcrumbs represent the sawdust of St. Joseph the carpenter. Most of the vegetables, fenugreek, broccoli, spinach, green beans, cabbage, cauliflower, are prepared as omelets. Stuffed artichokes are a major attraction. The cardoons are delicious boiled, then dipped in batter and fried. The green fava bean is also served as a fajita or with a garlic sauce. When dried, roasted, and blessed, it becomes the most popular lucky bean. Legend has it that you will never be broke as long as you carry a lucky bean. And we have some of the fava beans on the altar out there where you're free to take one.
And I got one in my pocket right now.
Right now, yeah. I should have put one in mine. Most of the vegetables, I'm sorry. The myth began during one of the famines in Sicily. The fava bean at that time was used as fodder for cattle. In order to survive, the poor farmers prepared them for their table. Thus, it became a lucky bean. Today, it is considered a delicacy and is used in numerous recipes. A most important custom, and a lovely one for the St. Joseph Day rite, is that of having children enact the roles of the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Sometimes angels or favorite saints are chosen to accompany them. A table is set especially for the children. They are served a very small portion of each food on the altar, beginning with the orange segment and other fruits, lentil soup, pasta Milanese, fish fajita, artichokes, olives, salads, cheese, eggs, bread, cookies, rice, and confetti sugar coated with almonds, figs, and sesame seed cakes. So you can see why they each got a small portion. It filled a large plate. This ritual is solemnly observed and usually accompanied by prayers and hymns. Guests dine after the Holy Family have completed their meal. Then there is much levity and joyful exchange of camaraderie. The age-old expression is frequently used, "May St. Joseph always smile upon you."
Good. Thank you, Ms. Nina. That was very articulate. Appreciate it. So it sounds, obviously it's a very thorough process. A lot goes into planning, I assume, into, not only planning for the foods, but getting all the friends and the company together and then having the actual altar. So before we go outside, is there any sort of etiquette that we should be mindful of when approaching the altar, when being around it?
No, not really.
Not really?
But the altar itself usually has the sweets, and it'll have a representative of, say the fish and that, but at the time they are having the St. Joseph altar, they're back there frying fish and preparing these vegetable dishes and all that would be served at another table, And then, of course, they serve the sweets that's on the altar itself.
Okay.
But there's a lot goes on in the background, like I say, frying the fish and getting all that together.
Okay.
I want to know why I couldn't turn a page on the Bible.
Well,
Tell your secret.
that's a cake. The Bible that's on the table is a cake, and it's just representing
This is
the
a
Bible.
very realistic looking.
It is.
I really thought it was a book.
It
But
is.
was the Bible.
It really is.
Is the altar there for the whole year or just for,
The day.
Oh, just for that day on March 19th.
okay,
So this is an off time, to be having a St. Joseph's altar. But
okay.
They-
So that's, just
they
have
asked
the
us
altar
if
up
we
for
would
March 19th.
put one up.
But it takes days and days to get it prepared.
It does.
Just for that one day. A lot of the women do a lot of the baking and cooking and.
Exactly.
Sure, and the guys too. The men
Oh, yeah.
help too. Yes.
I was curious about the linens on the table, and the setup. Like you have a beautiful framed image up there.
Well, that picture was in my husband's family home all these years, and we're not sure where it actually came from, because whenever they came from Sicily, they weren't able to bring things like that with them. But quite often they had drummers, as they would call it, come up from New Orleans and bring things like that they could purchase. And they also would get their cheese and other items from those drummers. And this particular picture that is up there was used in my husband's home when they had a St. Joseph's altar.
Okay.
It was on the altar.
So it was carried on in the
Yeah,
family
it is.
tradition.
It's right.
Beautiful,
Wonderful.
very nice.
Anybody have any questions before we walk outside and take a look at this beautiful piece of folk art? Any questions? No? Well, thank you, Miss Nita. We'll walk on outside now and take a look. So the next thing that's going to happen is the priest Does everybody see the cake? Those are the beans. I know.